So this is going to be quick. The time's going to go by pretty fast. So I am going to do my very best to get through everything that I can. Um, I am probably not going to do a very good job of managing the chat as we're going along. So at the end, I'll see if we have time for some questions, but I'll also put my email into the chat box. So feel free to reach out to me if you have questions on anything that I talk about in this presentation, just in case, again, for the sake of time, we're not able to get to it. So with that, I just want to say welcome. My name is Denise Rice Pryor. I am a clinical assistant professor with USU at the Tooele campus. And I wanted to share the preliminary findings from my dissertation that I'm in the final stages of completing. And this is looking at the role of grit as a contributing factor to social work retention um, after experiencing burnout. So, this study really looks at why do social workers stay, especially after experiencing burnout, when we know that there are so many others that do leave? Okay. So, first and foremost, I am proud to be a social worker, but there have been many a times over my career where I have thought about, am I in the right place? Why am I doing this work? Um, Sometimes working in a bookstore with very minimal human interaction is very appealing. I've often thought about finding some remote island somewhere where I can go and start an animal sanctuary or an animal rescue. Um, I'm wondering if that resonates with any of you over the course of your career. So, just to give you just briefly a little bit of some background, is I started working in child welfare in 1997, right out of graduate school. And after receiving my MSW in 2001, continued in the field and have been in the field. I'm very grateful for that for over 25 years and have experienced burnout several times throughout the course of my career. For those of you that maybe have also experienced some range of burnout, maybe multiple times, you can probably think back on how difficult those times were, um, how how challenging it was for you to try to maybe figure out what your next steps might be. Um, Really trying to navigate, how do I take care of myself, because I have this drive, I have this passion, I have this desire to help others, to be a conduit to social change and social justice. Um, but I'm sure we all know how difficult this work can be. So how do we continue to recharge our batteries? How do we continue to be at our best? And so I've read, probably just like many of you over the years, and been told throughout the course of my career that, burnout's going to happen. It's just part of what we do. There's kind of this normalization of it. Sometimes the conversations turn to, there's something wrong with you if you can't handle an experience of burnout, or you decide to leave the profession, maybe, or even just take a break for a while and kind of regroup and then come back at a later time. There's this kind of this unspoken um, influence of, well, there's something wrong with you as the person, almost like a character deficit. And as I've progressed in the field, I wanted to start to figure out how to switch the narrative, how to switch the narrative within our profession from, okay, well, burnout happens and yeah, people leave and that's just the way it goes, to, but why do people stay? Why do people stay even after experiencing burnout or even multiple experiences of burnout? So that is kind of what initially led me to want to explore um, this topic. So I'd love to hear from you. So in the chat, which is probably just the easiest because of the size of the group that we have today, which is amazing, and thank you again for taking the time to engage with us and this conference. But I'm curious, what has contributed to you staying in social work, maybe despite experiences of burnout or repeated challenges and obstacles? So if there's a way for you to just kind of briefly summarize, um, what are some of those factors? What are those things? And maybe they're internal, maybe they're external, maybe it's a combination of the two. But why do we stay? And I invite you all to read what others are sharing in the chat. And there are some themes that have already come up. Um, I had to chuckle, the one that said all that money. Okay. So there's a lot of different things. Yeah, I see flexibility, kind of finding the right fit for me. Sometimes it's out of necessity. Thank you for being honest. Support. Maybe it's coworkers, supervisors. It's the one thing that feels right, like it's the right fit for me. It's what I'm supposed to be doing. Uh, Here, learning about people and their stories. That's to me one of the greatest gifts about what we do, is people allowing us to share space with them in hearing about their experiences and learning about their narrative and their perspectives and um, their views. Awesome. These are great. Yeah. So take a look at what others are sharing as well. A lot about kind of the adaptability and the flexibility within the field, something different. Wonderful. Yeah. Great. All right. So I just want you to kind of hang on to those pieces. Think about kind of what it is for you that has contributed to staying in the field. And again, I want us to really work on kind of shifting that narrative, from kind of that deficit-based model of, well, yeah, we know it's hard work, right? We know the challenges, we know the secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, that's a real part of what we do. We know that. A lot of times the research and the literature has focused on that. This is what's going to happen to you if you work in this field, if you are a first responder, a helping professional, if you're hearing and being exposed to people's experiences and narratives, that is filled with, pain and trauma, that's going to take a toll on you. Like we know that. But I want us to start thinking about within ourselves what keeps us, right, motivated. I want you to think about what your passion is, trying to reconnect to why did we want to do this work to begin with, right? Knowing that there's going to be challenges and obstacles. Um, and how have we navigated these waters, over the course of your career? And if you're in supervisory roles or you're in, upper management types of roles, how can we think about and how can we again kind of shift the narrative within our agencies and our practices, um, maybe even within our policies, to better support one another, to acknowledge that yes, there are difficulties and challenges, but we know that for most of us, this is kind of built into who we are as a person, and we want to support that. We want to nurture that. We want what we say to match how we practice, right, at all levels. So thank you for sharing. So the objectives for today, that you'll understand the role of burnout and social work retention, explain grit theory and its relevance, kind of how I came to this place of wanting to explore grit specifically as a contributing factor. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the study design and the key findings, and then apply the insights to practice and social change. So some tips and suggestions on how we can utilize this information. And this is kind of just a starting point for me. I have lots of ideas of kind of where I want to go to kind of expand this research. So hopefully it's just kind of the beginning, because grit has not really been researched in the social work profession, specifically after people have experienced and recovered from burnout. So this is kind of one of the big gaps, kind of in the research that I'm attempting to try to fill with this particular study. So if you would enlighten me again just for a minute, when you hear the term grit, I'm curious what comes to mind for you. How do you define grit? John Wayne. Wonderful. So again, kind of take a look at what folks are sharing: enduring, perseverance, bouncing back, mental toughness, stick to itiveness. Yes. Learning to love the difficult. I love that. I might borrow that. Yep. The ability to keep going even when it's difficult to do so. Good. Great. And feel free. Keep putting in some ideas. So oftentimes what will come up are themes around kind of resilience, determination, um, purpose, and these all align, um, kind of with the concept of grit. There are some crossovers, and then there are some distinctions between the two. All right, thank you. So what is grit? So this was um, really kind of brought to the forefront of kind of our conversations by Dr. Angela Duckworth. Grit is defined as perseverance and passion for long-term goals despite setbacks and obstacles. And grit is made up of two key components. So perseverance, which is described as continuing despite difficulty, obstacles, or challenges. And then passion, which is sustained commitment or interest over time. But here's what's important: is grit is really not just about endurance, it's meaningful persistence. So it's tapping back into that meaning making component, right? What does this work mean for me? How does it, excuse me, how does it fit? How does it align with me and my values and my goals and my interests? If you're not familiar with Dr. Duckworth's book, this is the cover of it if you're interested. I also have a link at the end of the presentation to her TED Talk, which has been out for quite some time now. And initially, the body of research on grit was done with military cadets, in the education setting, and also with married couples, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. So, with regards to kind of what is grit theory, and this was the framework that I used for my dissertation, which I didn't mention earlier, so my apologies. It's for a doctorate in social work, and it's through Walden University. And hopefully, I'll have all the approvals to be able to publish it here pretty soon. But these are all of the preliminary findings that I'm going to go over with all of you today, which I'm really excited about to be able to share. So the research shows that grit predicts persistence more strongly than just talent. And that was kind of an area that Duckworth originally looked at, was almost kind of relating the higher the grit, the higher the talent that somebody has. Um, it's linked to retention across domains. So again, her early research again was in the education settings, the military, with West Point cadets, if you're interested in looking up that information, and then also within just kind of workplace settings in general. So the higher the grit led to higher retention in individuals that were initially surveyed. But here's the nuance though with this is grit is not just effort, it's sustained meaning over time. So it's that meaning piece that I think has kind of gotten lost. Why are we doing what we're doing? How are we keeping connected to what recharges our batteries? Despite difficulties in the work that we do, why do we keep going? Um, why is it so hard for us to think about maybe doing something else, even though I've thought about my animal rescue, on an island, just me and no other humans, because sometimes people can be really exhausting. Um, but the longer I think about it, I really don't see myself doing anything else other than social work. And I'm extremely grateful that I have lasted as long as I have, because I honestly don't know what I would do. I'm grateful for the experiences, the challenges, the the opportunities to get better at being uncomfortable. Even though early in my career, if I were to have a conversation with my 21-year-old self, that was working with adolescents that were in the foster care system in a group home, that's not what I would be telling myself. I would not be embracing, the learning opportunities. I was not embracing the uncomfortableness. I was not embracing feeling ill-equipped. Like I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't know how to handle the trauma that my residents had experienced, and how that was presenting itself into behaviors directly at me. I didn't understand all of that. I didn't know that. We were all doing the best we can with the tools we have. But over time and through various experiences, and honestly, I think just getting older, um, I look at my work kind of through a reflective lens now, and that's how I want to interact with the next generation of social workers coming behind me. Again, I want us to really move away from being so focused, especially for those of us that have been in supervisory director jobs, manager jobs, administrator jobs, of really taking the time to understand how that other person is really doing. How are they functioning? How are they continuing to put one foot in front of the other? Yes, I know that we have the administrative tasks that we have to do. And are you meeting productivity and, making sure documentation is in timely? Yes, those things are important, but we have to find a balance of taking the time and creating a space for people to be able to honestly talk about how hard this is. And when people are really struggling and maybe don't have the tools to know what to do next, or actually contemplating, I don't know if I can keep doing this, or I don't know if this is for me, or someone is just, when their alarm goes off in the morning, they dread getting up, having to come to work, right? I want us to be more mindful of that. That's kind of shift. I want to shift kind of this paradigm to, we know that it's hard, but how can we do a better job of supporting one another? Because we're all aware the work is always going to be there. And I think we're being tasked now more than ever, at least in my lifetime, how much we are needed, how much people need us. And so again, we really have to think about, what is it that I need to do? How do I need to ask for these things? Where do I find my support, my connection? What are the pieces that I need to make sure that I'm in an okay place to be able to keep doing and providing high quality services for people. So Duckworth's work emphasizes that success is not driven by talent alone, but by long-term persistence toward goals. However, more recent critiques have argued that grit alone is insufficient without structural support. And I would just kind of highlight support in general. Um, there's an overemphasis on grit, that it can shift responsibility onto individuals instead of looking at systemic issues or concerns that need to change. So again, looking at it as um, uh, people that leave our profession. Our social work attrition rate is tied to just a moral character deficit, right? Or, oh, the person just wasn't cut out for this work, which isn't always the case. Sometimes the conversation needs to be looking at our systems and how they're running, and what do we need to do differently to help support other social workers, because we want people to last long term. So when we look at burnout and retention, so burnout is not a rare experience in our profession. We know often it is expected. We've kind of gotten that message over the years. Burnout's been described as emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced accomplishment. And I could kind of pose the question to each of you, what does burnout look like for you? Maybe how do you know when you're approaching it? What changes about you? What do you notice? When do you know that maybe it's time to make a change? Um, and maybe I could also ask, if I wanted to kind of just as a poll, if you had to identify maybe how many times you've experienced burnout throughout your career, could you come up with a number? Some people can come up with a number, like specific kind of events. Some people have a really hard time quantifying it, which is understandable. Maybe it's, you kind of feel like this just this low grade kind of presence. It's not, too defined, um, you know, experiences. It's just kind of like, it's always kind of bubbling under the surface, but you've figured out a way to kind of keep going. So yeah, so Heidi, I'm gonna highlight your comment. Burnout to me is when my give a crap is broken. When it's just like, I have nothing else to give. Like I I I don't care right now. And I think we all need to be honest with ourselves that we've all been there. We've all been there. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us. That doesn't mean that we don't care. It has nothing to do with our our values, or what's important. It's just something that happens, right? Through the course of hearing and learning and experiencing. And we do really hard things. We do really hard things in this work. So just a couple of highlights with regards to the research around burnout. Um, Up to 60% of social workers experience burnout during COVID-19. Turnover rates can reach anywhere from 20 to 50% in the child welfare setting. So, any of you that have worked or maybe are working in child welfare, my hat goes off to you. Um, I spent a large chunk of time early in my career in child welfare, and I really honestly believe it changed me as a person. Um, Initially not for the positive, but it really forced me and pushed me right up to an opportunity for me to have to reevaluate my boundaries. I had to reevaluate separating my personal life and my professional life and not letting those lines blur. Re-engaging with hobbies, activities, interests outside of my professional capacity. um, but that was a really difficult time in my life. But again, I see that now that there was a huge opportunity in the midst of a crisis. But when I was in it, didn't feel like it was an opportunity at all. It made me feel horrible about myself, questioning again, what's my purpose? Why am I doing this? Is there something else I should be doing? The imposter syndrome just wreaked its ugly head and continues to every time I get to that place where maybe I'm like, I just don't care as much as I used to anymore. And then kind of having to revisit, all right, what do I need to, what needs to change, right? Where do I need to go next? So we know that burnout impacts our service quality, it impacts our workforce stability, and it impacts client outcomes. So again, like the question becomes, what helps people stay despite all these challenges? So why I wanted to do this research, again, looking at some of the gaps that are currently in the grit literature, is grit is understudied in social work as in the specific profession of social work. Grit is typically studied before, I don't like the word failure, but before really difficult experiences or challenges, not after someone has experienced and recovered from burnout. Grit is treated as an individual trait. Grit's assumed to be universally positive, right? We don't look at, excuse me, we don't look at grit as potentially having components that could be detrimental. And that was one of the findings that I came up with, or that I extracted from the interviews, is that perseverance can actually be a strain and can actually be um, not necessarily positive. And that retention research focuses solely on really why people leave, doesn't really address why people stay. So, this is just an overview of my study. So, my social work practice problem was looking at burnout and social work attrition. My research question was, what role did grit play in social work retention following burnout? So, after experiencing and recovering from burnout, I used a generic qualitative design. I used a specific interview protocol that I've attached on this slide, the questions that I asked participants. I did a purposive sampling, so I had a criteria for individuals to participate in the interviews. They had to have a completed MSW degree, had to experience burnout at least once, and chose to stay in the profession. Um, had to self report that they felt like they possessed grit. So I recruited through the Utah NASW member bank, and then also posted my recruitment flyers on various social work groups on different social media platforms. Um, Out of all the respondents, I ended up interviewing 14 social workers who all had at least an MSW degree. I had others who had MSW degrees and other degrees, including MBAs, one that had a PhD. And again, all of my participants experienced burnout and decided to remain in the profession. And I used thematic analysis. So I did both hand coding as and also a qualitative software program, Deduce. And from the interview transcripts, there were six particular themes that emerged. And the themes represent lived experiences of grit. So these are not theoretical constructs. So I am going to briefly go over the six themes, excuse me. And on the slides, there's also some quotes from participants that kind of that do align with that particular theme. So as I'm going through the themes, I just want you to think about maybe which ones resonate for you, which ones make sense for you. So the first theme that emerged was grit as a values-based anchor to purpose. So kind of why we do what we do. So participants described grit as deeply connected to their core values, identity, and sense of purpose. Rather than simply pushing through, grit functioned as a motivational anchor that reconnected them to why they entered social work in the first place. And when burnout created doubt, the participants relied on their commitment to helping others and their belief in the profession to remain engaged. And I particularly aligned very closely with this theme, that values-based anchor. I think I do this work because I was supposed to do this work. I think this is why I have a really hard time thinking about doing anything else, because it really just fits with me. So again, you can see just a couple of the quotes from participants. Um, you know, participant seven, that moment reminded me why I do this work. I can't fix everything, but helping in some way fuels my passion. Um, Refocusing on what matters, what's the most important for us. Um, Others described my career and my personal identity are intertwined. Theme two is perseverance was seen as both a strength and a strain. So this is kind of the one of the themes that emerged that's kind of contradictory to the previous grit literature and research that really highlights perseverance as being a positive. Based on what I was hearing from my participants, is that perseverance can be both a positive and a negative. Participants viewed perseverance as essential to staying in the profession, but also recognized it as a double edged sword. While perseverance helped them endure challenges and remain committed, it also contributed to delayed recognition of burnout and difficulty setting boundaries. The theme highlights that grit can both sustain and strain social workers simultaneously. So again, when we're operating kind of from this framework of, well, I just have to keep going, I just have to keep going. Maybe it's, I chose this work. Um, I it's maybe we some of us have the mentality of it's still a sign of weakness if we have to ask for help. Um, I don't have time to, put myself first. I do what I do for everybody else. That kind of continuation or that level of perseverance can actually, in some cases, contribute to experiences of burnout and keep people stuck in experiences of burnout for longer periods of time. Um, Participant four, for example, I thought pushing through meant I was strong. Looking back, I ignored every warning sign. So, really, kind of that I just have to keep doing, I have to keep going. Um, I didn't see burnout coming because I believed quitting meant failure. And that's a pretty powerful statement, I think. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this as well. So, theme three that emerged was that grit is rooted in culture and relationships. So, participants consistently identified grit as something learned through cultural values, family experiences, and social environments. Many described grit as modeled behavior, something passed down through generations or reinforced through shared experiences. This suggests that grit is not solely an individual trait, but a socially and culturally shaped capacity, which I think, again, is a beautiful way of looking at seeing and recognizing grit. I think that this really expands on Duckworth's previous research that grit is just kind of an individual trait or construct, but that there's other external influences that can contribute to how grit manifests in each of us in the work that we're doing. Um, so participants 10, for example, in my culture, quitting isn't an option. It shaped how I saw burnout. I learned grit from my family. It was survival. You just keep going. Grit came from watching others endure. Participant 8. It wasn't something I developed alone, right? It's not just in isolation. So, theme four is reflective reassessment following burnout. Participants describe burnout as a turning point that prompted intentional reflection and reevaluation of their professional roles. Through this process, they reassess their values, boundaries, and goals, which allowed them to re engage with social work in a more sustainable way. Grit supported this process by helping them stay committed while making any necessary changes. So, this reflective reassessment, so that opportunity to be able to really dig deep, to really kind of deconstruct, if you will, what's working and what's not working. Um, where might I need to make some changes? Um, you know, what what can I take from this experience? Participant one stated, I had to redefine what success looked like for me in the field. And I think that's a beautiful depiction of kind of through the course of our career. How do we define success? What does that look like? And I think early on we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. When I got into social work forever ago, I was gonna, change the world one child at a time. That was my goal. And then I really quickly realized I'm one person. I'm one person with really big dreams, with really, really big, I aspire to do really big things, but I'm one person. So how can I rein that in and take that goal that I have and make it something that's more user friendly for me, something that is more doable in the day to day, right? Because we know that doing something is a step in the right direction. Um, Realizing participant 3, realizing that my worth wasn't tied to a job title. And that really changed their perspective. So having that opportunity for more reflection, reevaluation, reassessment after experiencing burnout, participants felt like that really contributed to their grit, right? To their passion and to their perseverance, to their interest and to their commitment. Theme 5 focused on relational support, which replenishes emotional capacity. So participants emphasized that grit was not sustained in isolation. Support from colleagues, supervisors, and personal networks played a critical role in helping them recover from burnout and continue in the profession. These relationships provided emotional validation, encouragement, and shared understanding, which replenished their capacity to do the work. So in the in the beginning, I asked you to write what were some of the factors that contributed to you staying in the profession, and many of you spoke about that relational support, those connections, right? Who were those people? Colleagues, supervisors, peer support. Um, Participant 8 says it, I think, beautifully. You need people who can hold space for what this work does to you without judgment, right? Without shame. That's what our clients are looking for. They're looking for that space to be able to be real, to be honest, to really kind of cut themselves open and share their innermost thoughts and feelings and experiences without being judged and shamed, and ridiculed. And that's what we're looking for too. So, how can we collectively as a profession maybe do a better job of that for one another? How can we do that in our day to day practice, wherever you may be practicing? How can we model that for the next generation that's coming up behind us? Um, Connection, right? Human beings are designed to be in relationships. We are designed to be in connection. So, how can we honor that, and be very intentional in that practice? And then it also helps us with our professional retention rates as well. And the last theme that emerged was adaptation and flexibility, which support retention and staying in the field. So, participants described staying in social work not as remaining in the same role, but as adapting their practice to better align with their needs and values. So, this included changing positions, maybe settings or agencies, or how they approach care, how they also approach self care, or I call it self preservation. I don't like the term self care. All of my students will tell you. I say it's really about self preservation. Grit enabled them to remain committed to the profession while making flexible adjustments that supported long-term sustainability. So, what again I love about being a social worker is the flexibility, is how many different jobs I have had over the 25 plus years. Um, and not feeling an obligation to necessarily stay somewhere that I didn't think was a good fit or that I didn't get excited about. I am grateful for having worked in child welfare, community mental health, adult corrections, specifically within the adoption world, doing crisis and psych evaluations in a hospital ER, teaching. So I mean, all of these different things have been, really just opportunities and gifts. So the fact that we have that flexibility is something that we really need to embrace. So this slide is just kind of looking at, there's a little bit of a crossover between theme 2 and theme 4, where perseverance is seen as a strength and a strain, and then the reflective kind of reassessment. But really, the difference between the two is, theme 2 is kind of looking at when we're in kind of a burnout experience. Grit drives continued effort despite exhaustion. Social workers push through stress and adversity. There's difficulty recognizing burnout symptoms. Boundaries can often be ignored or delayed. So kind of that it's kind of the unexamined grit, if you will. The quote that I pulled for that theme is kind of perseverance kept me going, but it also made it harder to kind of stop and say, wait a minute, right? Something's not working. So that's kind of that that other side to perseverance not always being a positive component. Whereas the reflective reassessment theme 4, again, burnout prompts intentional reflection, a reassessment of our values, our roles, our boundaries. We want to look at changes to sustain long-term practice. We want to find ways to reconnect to our purpose in a more adaptive, maybe a more healthy way. Um, this is kind of, again, after the burnout experience. So this is kind of more the reflective grit. Grit alone does not sustain us. Reflection transforms grit into a sustainable practice. So some of the contradictions in the literature is, so again, we know that grit supports persistence, and grit also connects us to our purpose. But what I found through this study is that grit, in some occasions, can actually reinforce burnout. So again, that's kind of looking at that perseverance component that we just talked about, how it can be both a strength and a strain. And that grit does not replace structural change. So again, there may be areas that we need to look at within our systems and our agencies and our practices. Again, not just being focused on, well, burnout is just an individual problem. We need to look at where within our practices might there be areas to reevaluate that might not be in alignment with self-preservation activities for our workforce. So again, there's still the responsibility within us in the profession to look at what areas do we need to, again, maybe reflect on and have some honest conversations kind of moving forward to really protect our workforce. So, some of the implications for social change that I identified as a result of the findings were kind of at the micro level is looking at meaning making practices, specifically, big fan of reflective supervision. I want us to normalize conversations about burnout and challenges. Again, burnout is not a character deficit. We need to, again, look at how we can kind of shape um, how we can change kind of that perspective and those messages that we may be overtly or subtly um, kind of putting out there um, to other social workers within our agencies. Um, Really kind of pulling away from that mindset of a person is not necessarily cut out for this. And there are those that maybe really just are not um, a, a good fit, if you will, within our work. Or maybe they haven't found the best fit. But I don't want us to focus on strictly of, again, this is just this person just, can't handle it. Because again, we're doing really difficult things in the work that we're doing. So at the meso level, looking at relational workplace cultures, supportive supervision, maybe thinking about how we're doing supervision, um, group supervision, maybe incorporating that more. At the macro level, looking at some policy reform, maybe some practice standards, caseload standards for those of you, again, who carry specific caseloads, really working to limit caseloads. And again, I know that has been an ongoing issue forever since I've been in the profession, especially within child welfare. And also looking at some more workforce protections. We want grit to inform change, not excuse harmful systems. We need to move away from that. We need to look at, again, how can we bring ideas? How can we bring our experiences to the table and not continue to just kind of, again, excuse, well, this is how we've always done it. And just because it's how we've always done it doesn't mean that it is working well. It doesn't mean that it is meeting our workforce needs. So, some of the key takeaways, as I know we just have a few minutes left, the role of grit is really multifaceted. The key factors to social work retention following burnout include relational support, role flexibility, values alignment, meaningful impact, work outcomes, self care or self preservation with clear boundaries, professional investment, and individual motivation for change. Grit contributes to ongoing engagement within our profession. Grit in social work is not seen as a fixed individual trait with the participants that I interviewed for this study. Grit enables reconnection, reflection, relational support, and flexibility or adaptation of one's professional commitment. And grit really evolves through burnout. This was something that I don't think I really thought about when I started doing this research 4 years ago, is that it really does evolve through the experience of burnout. All right. So somebody mentioned John Wayne when I asked you earlier, what comes to mind when you think of grit? And so I had a quote back here from John Wayne, true grit is making a decision and standing by it and doing what must be done. I wanted to share a couple other quotes from folks, including Dr. Seuss from the Lorax, which I'm sure you all have seen before. Um, but I hope that this just gave you just some things to think about, maybe some ideas, some takeaways to kind of ponder. Um, I will put my email in the chat again if anybody has any other questions. But I want to thank each of you as my colleagues for what you do, what you bring to the table every day. I am grateful to be a part of an amazing group of individuals. We have a lot of work to do. We are going to be challenged as we are being challenged, but I know that together we will rise to the occasion. So, um, I will also just share last thing for those of you who might be interested. Just remember, put your mask on first before trying to assist anyone else. This is my favorite safety spiel on airlines. You can't put somebody else's mask on if you're dead. That's kind of my dark end to that thing, but take care of yourself first so that you continue to take care of others. So here's my references and my resources. Again, there's a link to the TED Talk in the book. If anybody has anything, I'm happy to talk outside of this conference. Just let me know. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much for your time.